Some towns hold their secrets closer than others. This one whispers them in the mist.
Have you ever driven through a small mountain town and felt like everyone was watching you? Not just curious glances, but something deeper, more calculated, as if your arrival had been anticipated and discussed. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where cell service dies and GPS systems mysteriously malfunction, there exist communities that operate by rules no government ever wrote. Today, we're uncovering 5 remote towns where secret societies didn't just take root, they consumed everything, transforming ordinary mountain communities into something far more sinister. Before we venture into these shadowed hollows, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, what you're about to discover will make you question everything you thought you knew about small-town America, especially if you've ever wondered what happens when isolation meets absolute power. These aren't your typical conspiracy theories or internet legends. These are documented cases of organized groups that systematically infiltrated and controlled entire communities, using methods that would make organized crime families jealous. Each town we'll explore today represents a different approach to total social domination, from religious extremism to economic manipulation to something far more disturbing. What makes these stories particularly chilling is how ordinary they appeared from the outside. Travelers passing through often described quaint mountain communities with friendly locals and charming main streets. But those who stayed longer, who asked too many questions, or who simply witnessed the wrong conversation at the wrong time, discovered that beneath the surface, hospitality lay networks of control that stretched back generations. 1. Covenant Hollow, West Virginia, where faith became fear. Nestled in a valley so remote that the nearest paved road lies 12 miles away, Covenant Hollow appeared on few official maps until the 1990s. For over 70 years, this community of roughly 180 residents lived under the absolute control of an organization calling itself the Sacred Brotherhood of the Mountain. What began as a small religious sect in the 1920s gradually evolved into something that controlled every aspect of daily life through a combination of spiritual manipulation and systematic intimidation. The Brotherhood's founder, Ezekiel Marsh, arrived in the Hollow in 1923, claiming to be a prophet with direct communication from God. Within 5 years, he had convinced most residents to deed their property to the Brotherhood in exchange for eternal salvation and protection from the coming apocalypse. But Marsh's true genius lay not in his religious rhetoric, but in his organizational structure. He divided the community into circles of authority, with each circle knowing only enough information to perform their assigned functions while remaining ignorant of the larger operation. The outer circle consisted of ordinary residents who attended mandatory daily services and followed strict lifestyle rules. They worked assigned jobs, married approved partners, and raised children according to Brotherhood doctrine. The middle circle included enforcers who monitored compliance and reported infractions. These individuals carried special badges and had the authority to impose punishments ranging from reduced food rations to extended periods of isolation. The inner circle, never exceeding 12 members, made all significant decisions and had access to the Brotherhood's true financial operations. What outsiders didn't realize was that Covenant Hollow had become a sophisticated money laundering operation. The Brotherhood required all residents to turn over their paychecks from outside employment, but they also ran several legitimate businesses that served as fronts for processing illegal income from sources throughout the region. A small furniture workshop produced handcrafted items sold at premium prices to collectors who unknowingly participated in the laundering scheme. Honey Operation supplied products to health food stores across 3 states with inflated invoices that justified large cash deposits. Most disturbing was the Brotherhood's approach to information control. No resident owned a radio, television, or telephone. All mail was intercepted and read by Middle Circle members before being delivered or destroyed. Children attended a one-room school where they learned only basic literacy and Brotherhood doctrine. Anyone attempting to leave faced immediate consequences. Their belongings would be confiscated, their family members would be forbidden from speaking to them, and they would be escorted to the Hollow's boundary by armed enforcers, with warnings never to return. The Brotherhood maintained its power through a sophisticated network of informants that extended far beyond the Hollow itself. They had contacts in nearby towns who reported on any former residents attempting to contact authorities. They maintained relationships with corrupt officials who would dismiss complaints or redirect investigations. Most effectively, they had cultivated a reputation for violence that kept potential whistleblowers silent even after escaping the community. Federal investigators first became aware of Covenant Hollow in 1994 when a former resident, Sarah Caldwell, approached the FBI with detailed documentation of the Brotherhood's operations. Caldwell had served in the Middle Circle for 15 years before becoming disillusioned and planning her escape. She spent 2 years secretly photographing documents, recording conversations, and mapping the organization's structure before fleeing with her 2 children during a winter storm. The investigation revealed that the Brotherhood had processed over $12 million in illegal funds between 1985 and 1994, primarily from drug trafficking operations based in larger cities. They had also been involved in weapons smuggling, using their remote location and network of mountain trails to move firearms between states without detection. Most shocking was the discovery of detailed psychological profiles maintained on every resident, documenting their fears, weaknesses, and family relationships to maximize control. When federal agents finally raided Covenant Hollow in 1997, they found a community in complete psychological lockdown. Residents initially refused to speak to investigators, claiming they didn't understand English despite clearly comprehending every question. Children hid when approached by unfamiliar adults, and several families barricaded themselves in their homes rather than cooperate with the raid. The Brotherhood's leadership had anticipated this scenario and implemented a scorched earth protocol. Before fleeing into the mountains, they destroyed most financial records and eliminated evidence of their most serious crimes. They also activated a disinformation campaign, spreading rumors throughout the region that the federal raid was actually an attack on religious freedom rather than a criminal investigation. Today, Covenant Hollow sits largely abandoned. A few families remain, but they maintain minimal contact with the outside world and refuse to discuss the Brotherhood years. The original church building still stands, though local teenagers dare each other to approach it after dark. Those brave enough to peer through the broken windows report seeing symbols carved into the wooden walls and strange stains on the floor that have never faded despite decades of weather exposure. Well, most unsettling are the reports from hikers who occasionally pass through the area. They describe encountering individuals who match descriptions of Brotherhood members living in crude shelters deeper in the mountains. These individuals allegedly watch travelers from a distance but never approach or respond to greetings. Some hikers have reported finding fresh supplies at abandoned campsites, as if someone had been monitoring their movements and providing assistance without making contact. The Brotherhood's influence extends beyond their former territory through a network of affiliated groups that adopted similar organizational structures. Federal investigators have identified at least 8 other communities in Appalachian regions where former Brotherhood members established new operations using refined versions of their control methods. These groups learned from Covenant Hollow's mistakes, maintaining lower profiles while exercising equally complete control over their followers. 2. Millfield Junction, Kentucky, where money bought everything, including souls. Hidden in the hills of eastern Kentucky, Millfield Junction appeared to be a typical coal mining town, struggling to survive the industry's decline. Its population of roughly 400 residents faced the same challenges as countless other Appalachian communities: young people leaving for better opportunities, businesses closing, and a general sense of hopelessness about the future. But in 1989, everything changed when a mysterious investment group calling itself Mountain Heritage Development began purchasing property throughout the town. The group's representatives, led by a charismatic businessman named Vincent Crawford, promised to revitalize Millfield Junction through careful economic development that would preserve the community's character while creating sustainable employment. They offered generous payments for properties, provided low-interest loans to struggling families, and funded improvements to infrastructure that the cash-strapped local government couldn't afford. Within 3 years, Mountain Heritage Development owned or controlled over 60% of all property in Millfield Junction. What residents didn't realize was that Crawford and his associates were members of an organization known as the Order of the Golden Circle, a secretive group with roots dating back to the Civil War era. The original Golden Circle had been a pro-Confederate secret society that planned to create a slave-holding empire stretching from the southern United States through Mexico and into South America. While that particular vision never materialized, the organization survived in various forms, eventually evolving into a network focused on accumulating wealth and political influence through the systematic control of small communities. The modern Golden Circle operated like a sophisticated business enterprise with multiple revenue streams and long-term strategic goals. Their takeover of Millfield Junction served as a pilot program for techniques they planned to implement in other isolated communities throughout Appalachia. The town became a laboratory for testing methods of social control that combined economic dependency with psychological manipulation. Crawford's first major initiative was establishing the Millfield Junction Community Trust, a financial institution that provided banking services, business loans, and investment opportunities exclusively to local residents. The trust offered interest rates and terms that seemed too good to be true, and indeed they were. Every loan contract contained carefully worded clauses that gave the trust extensive rights over borrowers' property and business decisions. Families who fell behind on payments found themselves subject to terms that essentially made them indentured servants to the organization. The Golden Circle also created a complex web of interlocking businesses that dominated the local economy. They opened a general store that offered competitive prices and convenient credit terms, gradually driving independent retailers out of business. They established a construction company that won contracts for all major building projects through a combination of competitive bidding and intimidation of potential competitors. They even created a security firm that provided private policing services to supplement the overwhelmed county sheriff's department. Most insidiously, the Golden Circle infiltrated every important social institution in Millfield Junction. They funded improvements to the local school in exchange for influence over curriculum and hiring decisions. They made generous donations to churches while quietly supporting pastoral candidates who would preach messages aligned with their interests. They sponsored community events and festivals that celebrated their version of local history while gradually erasing memories of life before their arrival. The organization's control methods were subtle but comprehensive. They maintained detailed files on every family in town, documenting financial situations, personal relationships, political opinions, and potential sources of resistance. They used this information to identify and neutralize potential opposition before it could organize. Residents who asked too many questions about the organization's activities would suddenly find their loan terms modified or their employment situations threatened. Children growing up in Millfield Junction during this period received a carefully crafted education that emphasized loyalty to the community while discouraging critical thinking about its power structures. The school's curriculum included extensive instruction in local history that portrayed the Golden Circle's arrival as a salvation that rescued the town from inevitable decline. Students learned that questioning community leadership was tantamount to betraying their neighbors and families. The Golden Circle also implemented a sophisticated surveillance system that monitored communications and tracked movement throughout the town. They installed listening devices in public buildings under the guise of security improvements. They recruited informants from among financially dependent residents who reported on conversations and activities that might indicate dissatisfaction with the current arrangement. They even monitored mail and phone calls through contacts at the post office and telephone company. By 1995, Millfield Junction had achieved the Golden Circle's vision of total social control. The unemployment rate had dropped to near zero because everyone worked for organizations owned or controlled by the group. Crime had virtually disappeared because the security firm handled all law enforcement with methods that discouraged both criminal activity and complaints about their tactics. The town's population had stabilized as economic opportunities kept young people from leaving, while carefully managed immigration brought in new residents who were already sympathetic to the organization's goals. But the Golden Circle's success contained the seeds of its own destruction. Their methods attracted attention from federal investigators who were monitoring similar activities in other parts of the country. More importantly, their control was so complete that it created a false sense of security that led to increasingly bold activities that left more obvious evidence trails. The beginning of the end came in 1997 when a former resident named Michael Torres contacted investigative journalists with detailed information about the Golden Circle's operations. Torres had grown up in Millfield Junction during the takeover period and had been recruited into the organization's youth leadership program. His position gave him access to internal documents and meetings that revealed the true scope of their activities. Torres documented how the Golden Circle was using Millfield Junction as a base for much larger operations that included money laundering for organized crime families, tax evasion schemes that defrauded the federal government of millions of dollars, and influence peddling operations that corrupted officials in multiple states. The town's legitimate businesses were generating far less revenue than their reported profits suggested, with the difference being made up through illegal activities that used the community as cover. The investigation that followed Torres's revelations took 3 years to complete and involved multiple federal agencies working together to untangle the Golden Circle's complex financial and organizational structure. Investigators discovered that Millfield Junction was just one of 7 communities where the organization had established similar operations, creating a network that processed over $50 million in illegal funds annually. The federal raids that dismantled the Golden Circle's operations in 2000 revealed the true extent of their psychological control over Millfield Junction's residents. When agents arrived to make arrests, they encountered a community so thoroughly conditioned that many residents initially refused to believe that Crawford and his associates were criminals. Some families had been so financially integrated into the organization's structure that they faced genuine hardship when the illegal funding streams were cut off. The aftermath proved almost as disturbing as the control itself. Mental health professionals brought in to help residents adjust to their newfound freedom reported widespread symptoms resembling those found in cult survivors. Many adults struggled with basic decision-making after years of having choices made for them by the organization. Children who had grown up under the Golden Circle's influence required extensive counseling to develop normal social skills and critical thinking abilities. Today, Millfield Junction exists in a strange limbo between its controlled past and an uncertain future. About half the original population remains, but the community has never fully recovered its economic stability or social cohesion. The buildings owned by Mountain Heritage Development stand mostly empty, their windows boarded up, and their purpose forgotten. Local residents rarely discuss the Golden Circle years, and visitors who ask too many questions about that period often find themselves politely but firmly discouraged from lingering in town. Most troubling are the reports from former residents who claim that remnants of the Golden Circle's network remain active in the region. They describe receiving mysterious phone calls warning them not to discuss their experiences with outsiders. Some have reported surveillance activities around their new homes, including vehicles with tinted windows parked on their streets and strangers asking neighbors questions about their daily routines. 3. Shadow Creek, North Carolina, where knowledge became currency and secrets became chains. Tucked away in the Blue Ridge Mountains, Shadow Creek appeared to be nothing more than a collection of weathered cabins and a single general store serving the handful of families who had chosen to live off the beaten path. But appearances can be devastatingly deceptive, especially when dealing with an organization that had spent decades perfecting the art of invisibility. The group that controlled Shadow Creek called itself the Archive, and their approach to domination was unlike anything seen in other controlled communities. Rather than relying on religious manipulation or economic dependency, the Archive built their power on information, specifically the systematic collection, cataloging, and weaponization of personal secrets from throughout the entire region. The Archive's origins traced back to 1962, when a former intelligence operative named Marcus Holloway purchased a large tract of land in the remote valley that would become Shadow Creek. Holloway had spent his career developing psychological operations techniques for various government agencies, skills that he put to devastating use in civilian life. His vision was to create a community that would serve as both a sanctuary for like-minded individuals and a base of operations for intelligence gathering activities that could generate substantial profits. Holloway's first recruits were carefully selected from among former military personnel, intelligence operatives, and individuals with specialized skills in surveillance, psychology, and information processing. These founding members established the organizational structure that would define the Archive for the next 4 decades. Unlike other secret societies that relied on rigid hierarchies, the Archive operated more like a professional intelligence service, with specialized departments handling different aspects of their operations. The Community Relations Department was responsible for maintaining Shadow Creek's facade as a simple mountain settlement. These individuals interacted with outsiders, managed the general store that served as the community's public face, and cultivated relationships with local officials in nearby towns. Their job was to ensure that the Archive's activities never attracted unwanted attention while gathering intelligence about potential targets for their operations. The Data Collection Department represented the Archive's core strength. These specialists used a combination of traditional surveillance techniques and cutting-edge technology to gather information about individuals, families, and organizations throughout the Appalachian region. They maintained listening posts disguised as hunting cabins, used sophisticated communication intercept equipment to monitor phone calls and radio transmissions, and employed a network of informants who often didn't realize they were working for the Archive. The analysis department processed the raw intelligence gathered by data collection, identifying patterns, relationships, and vulnerabilities that could be exploited for profit or control. They maintained detailed psychological profiles on thousands of individuals, tracking their habits, relationships, fears, and secrets with scientific precision. This information was stored in a climate-controlled facility built into the mountainside, containing filing systems that rivaled those of major intelligence agencies. The operations department was responsible for actually using the collected intelligence to achieve the Archive's goals. These individuals specialized in blackmail, extortion, manipulation, and occasionally more direct forms of intimidation. They operated throughout the region under various cover identities, never revealing their connection to Shadow Creek or each other. What made the archive particularly dangerous was their patience and long-term thinking. Rather than pursuing quick profits through obvious criminal activities, they built their power gradually over decades, carefully selecting targets and timing their operations to avoid detection. They specialized in identifying individuals in positions of authority who had secrets worth protecting. Corrupt officials, unfaithful spouses, tax evaders, or anyone whose reputation could be destroyed by the right information becoming public. The archive's business model was elegantly simple. They would approach a target with evidence of compromising behavior, offering to keep the information confidential in exchange for specific favors or payments. These favors might include insider information about government contracts, advance warning about law enforcement activities, or assistance with the archive's other operations. The payments were usually modest enough to be affordable, but regular enough to provide steady income. Over time, the archive developed an extensive network of compromised individuals throughout the region who provided them with a constant stream of intelligence and influence. A county commissioner might warn them about planned development projects that could affect their operations. A bank manager might provide information about large cash transactions that could indicate criminal activity worth investigating. A postal worker might report on mail patterns that revealed personal relationships or business connections. The residents of Shadow Creek itself lived under constant surveillance, though most were willing participants who had joined the archive specifically to be part of their operations. New residents underwent extensive background checks and psychological evaluations before being accepted into the community. Once accepted, they were expected to contribute their skills to the archive's activities while maintaining the facade of living simple, rural lives. Children born in Shadow Creek received an education unlike anything found in traditional schools. They learned languages, surveillance techniques, psychology, and computer skills alongside basic academic subjects. By adolescence, many were already participating in intelligence gathering activities, using their innocent appearance to access information that would be difficult for adults to obtain. The archive's most sophisticated operation involved the systematic infiltration of genealogical and historical societies throughout Appalachia. They recognized that these organizations had access to detailed family histories, property records, and personal documents that could reveal valuable secrets about prominent families and individuals. Archive members would join these societies as enthusiastic amateur historians, gradually gaining access to their archives and copying sensitive documents for their own files. This genealogical intelligence proved incredibly valuable for identifying potential blackmail targets and understanding the complex family relationships that shaped regional politics and business. The archive could trace family connections that explained why certain business deals were made, why specific officials received appointments, or why particular crimes went unpunished. This knowledge gave them unprecedented insight into the hidden power structures that actually controlled their region. The archive also pioneered the use of early computer technology for intelligence analysis, installing sophisticated systems in their mountain facility years before such equipment became common in law enforcement agencies. They used these systems to cross-reference information from multiple sources, identify patterns that human analysts might miss and maintain secure communications with their network of informants and compromised individuals. By the 1990s, the archive had achieved a level of influence that bordered on invisible government control over significant portions of western North Carolina. They had compromising information on dozens of elected officials, business leaders, and law enforcement personnel. They could influence contract awards, election outcomes, and criminal investigations through their network of controlled individuals. They had accumulated detailed intelligence files on thousands of families, creating a resource that would have been invaluable to anyone seeking to understand or manipulate regional politics. But the archive's downfall came from an unexpected source: their own success. In 1998, a routine FBI investigation into government corruption in a neighboring county uncovered evidence of systematic information leaks that didn't match any known criminal organization's methods. The sophisticated nature of these leaks suggested the involvement of individuals with professional intelligence training, prompting federal investigators to expand their inquiry. The investigation that followed was one of the most complex domestic intelligence operations in FBI history. Federal agents had to essentially reverse engineer the archive's network by following information trails, analyzing communication patterns, and identifying the common source of intelligence that multiple compromised individuals had been receiving. The process took over 2 years and required the cooperation of multiple federal agencies. When investigators finally identified Shadow Creek as the center of the operation, they faced the challenge of gathering evidence against an organization that had spent decades perfecting the art of avoiding detection. The archive's members were skilled in counter-surveillance techniques and had contingency plans for destroying evidence if their security was compromised. The breakthrough came when federal agents managed to flip one of the archive's lower-level operatives who had become disillusioned with the organization's methods. This individual provided detailed information about the archive's structure, operations, and the location of their main data storage facility. Armed with this intelligence, federal agents were able to plan a coordinated raid that prevented the archive from implementing their evidence destruction protocols. The raid on Shadow Creek in 2001 uncovered what federal prosecutors described as the most sophisticated domestic intelligence operation ever discovered on American soil. Investigators found over 2 million individual files containing personal information about residents throughout the southeastern United States. They discovered evidence of hundreds of blackmail and extortion operations that had generated millions of dollars in illegal profits. Most disturbing, they found detailed plans for expanding the archive's operations to other regions of the country. The psychological impact on the archive's victims proved as devastating as the financial damage. Many individuals who had been unknowingly compromised for years faced the humiliating revelation that their private lives had been under constant surveillance. Some resigned from public office rather than face questions about their cooperation with the archive. Others required extensive counseling to cope with the violation of privacy they had experienced. The legal proceedings that followed took nearly 5 years to complete, as prosecutors worked to untangle the archive's complex web of operations and identify all their victims. Many of the organization's files were so detailed that they read like intelligence dossiers compiled by professional spy agencies. Federal agents discovered that the archive had maintained active surveillance on some families for over 30 years, documenting everything from marriage problems to financial difficulties to embarrassing medical conditions. Most chilling was the discovery of what the archive called their succession files, detailed plans for transferring their operations to other locations if Shadow Creek was compromised. These documents revealed that similar organizations were already operating in at least 12 other states, using refined versions of the archive's methods. Federal investigators realized they had uncovered not just a single criminal enterprise, but a network of intelligence gathering operations that had been quietly spreading throughout rural America for decades. Today, Shadow Creek sits abandoned except for a few federal monitoring stations disguised as communication towers. The archive's underground facility was sealed after investigators finished cataloging its contents, but local hikers report strange electronic interference in the area that suggests some equipment may still be active. Former residents of nearby communities continue to discover evidence of archive surveillance in their daily lives, hidden cameras in public buildings, monitoring devices in telephone equipment, and informants among people they had trusted for years. 4. Blackwood Crossing, Tennessee, where tradition masked tyranny and bloodlines determined everything. Nestled in a valley where 3 county lines converged, creating a jurisdictional nightmare for law enforcement, Blackwood Crossing appeared to be a picturesque example of Appalachian heritage preservation. The town's main street featured authentic 19th century buildings. Its residents wore traditional mountain clothing, and visitors were welcomed with demonstrations of old-time crafts and folkways that seem to have survived unchanged for generations. But beneath this carefully maintained facade operated one of the most ruthless and enduring secret societies in American history, an organization that called itself the Blood Covenant, whose members believed that certain bloodlines carried inherent rights to rule over others. What made the Blood Covenant particularly dangerous was their sophisticated understanding of how to use cultural preservation as a cover for systematic oppression, and their willingness to use extreme violence to maintain their version of social order. The Blood Covenant's origins traced back to 1834, when a group of wealthy plantation owners fled to the Tennessee mountains following a series of slave rebellions that had made their previous locations untenable. These individuals brought with them not only substantial financial resources, but also a deeply ingrained belief in racial and class hierarchies that they were determined to preserve despite changing social conditions throughout the rest of the country. The founders established Blackwood Crossing as what they termed a covenant community, a place where traditional values and social structures could be maintained without interference from outside authorities. They purchased large tracts of land, built the settlement's core buildings, and recruited settlers who shared their vision of preserving what they considered the natural order of society. From its earliest days, Blackwood Crossing operated according to a rigid caste system that determined every aspect of residents' lives. The Covenant families, descendants of the original founders, occupied the top tier and owned all significant property and businesses. The sworn families, long-term residents who had proven their loyalty and usefulness, served in management and skilled labor positions. The bound families, typically recent arrivals or those with questionable backgrounds, performed manual labor and service work under conditions that closely resembled indentured servitude. What made this system particularly insidious was how it was disguised as voluntary participation in traditional mountain culture. The Blood Covenant convinced residents that they were preserving authentic Appalachian ways of life that were under attack from modern society. They portrayed the rigid social hierarchy as a return to simpler times when everyone knew their place and communities took care of their own. The organization maintained control through a combination of economic dependency, social isolation, and carefully applied violence. All employment in Blackwood Crossing was controlled by Covenant family businesses, which meant that questioning the system could result in immediate unemployment and eviction. The town was deliberately isolated from modern communication systems, with no telephone service, limited mail delivery, and restrictions on radio and television ownership. Most effectively, the Blood Covenant used a sophisticated system of informants and enforcers to monitor compliance with their social rules. Every family was assigned a mentor from a higher social tier who was responsible for ensuring proper behavior and reporting violations. These mentors had broad authority to impose punishments, ranging from reduced work assignments to temporary exile from the community. The Blood Covenant's approach to violence was calculated and demonstrative. Rather than simply eliminating troublemakers, they used public punishments that served as warnings to others while maintaining the facade of traditional justice. The town square featured a restored pillory and stocks where violators were subjected to public humiliation. More serious offenses resulted in ritualized beatings administered by masked enforcers during community gatherings that residents were required to attend. The organization also perfected the art of making people disappear without generating outside attention. Troublesome residents would be assigned to work details in remote areas where accidents could occur far from witnesses. Their deaths would be reported to outside authorities as industrial mishaps or natural disasters, with detailed documentation that appeared to support these explanations. Children born in Blackwood Crossing received an education specifically designed to perpetuate the Blood Covenant's social system. The town's school taught a version of history that portrayed slavery as a benevolent institution, the Civil War as an unjust attack on Southern rights, and racial segregation as the natural order intended by God. Students learned that their social position was determined by bloodline, and that attempting to rise above their designated level was both futile and morally wrong. The Blood Covenant also developed an elaborate mythology around their founding families, claiming direct descent from European nobility and Native American chiefs who had supposedly formed alliances to preserve pure bloodlines. This mythology was supported by carefully fabricated genealogical records, historical documents, and even archaeological evidence planted throughout the region. By the 1960s, the Blood Covenant had achieved such complete control over Blackwood Crossing that the community operated as an autonomous enclave within the United States. They had their own legal system based on what they called covenant law, their own currency for internal transactions, and their own military force composed of armed enforcers who patrolled the town's boundaries. The organization's influence extended far beyond their immediate territory, through strategic marriages, business partnerships, and political connections that placed sympathetic individuals in positions of authority throughout the region. County sheriffs, judges, and state legislators were either blood covenant members or had been compromised through various forms of coercion. The blood covenant also operated several profitable illegal enterprises that provided funding for their operations while serving their ideological goals. They ran a human trafficking network that specialized in providing domestic workers to wealthy families throughout the Southeast, using their traditional values rhetoric to justify what amounted to modern slavery. They operated illegal gambling establishments disguised as cultural events, and they maintained a weapons manufacturing operation that produced firearms for various extremist groups. What made the Blood Covenant particularly dangerous was their ability to adapt their methods to changing times while maintaining their core beliefs. During the Civil Rights era, they shifted from overt racial oppression to more subtle forms of discrimination that were harder for outside authorities to detect. They learned to use legal mechanisms like zoning laws and business regulations to achieve their goals while maintaining plausible deniability. The organization also developed sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities that allowed them to identify and neutralize threats before they could develop into serious problems. They maintained surveillance on civil rights activists, federal agents, and journalists who showed interest in their activities. They used their network of contacts to gather advance warning about investigations and their financial resources to hire skilled attorneys who could exploit legal technicalities to avoid prosecution. The beginning of the end for the Blood Covenant came in 1987 when a young woman named Jennifer Matthews escaped from Blackwood Crossing and contacted federal authorities with detailed information about the organization's activities. Matthews had been born into a bound family, but had been selected for advanced education because of her intelligence, giving her access to information that most residents never saw. Matthews spent 2 years secretly documenting the Blood Covenant's operations, using her position as a teacher in the town's school to access records and observe the organization's leadership. She photographed internal documents, recorded conversations, and mapped the complex relationships that maintained the group's power structure. Her escape was carefully planned and executed with the help of several other residents who had become disillusioned with the Blood Covenant's increasingly extreme methods. They used their knowledge of the town's security systems and patrol schedules to reach the outside world with evidence that would finally expose the organization's true nature. The federal investigation that followed was complicated by the Blood Covenant's political connections and their skill at destroying evidence. Many of their most incriminating documents were stored in hidden locations that investigators never found, and several key witnesses died in suspicious accidents before they could testify. However, the investigation did reveal enough evidence to file charges against dozens of Blood Covenant members and to justify a comprehensive raid on Blackwood Crossing in 1991. Federal agents discovered extensive documentation of human rights violations, financial crimes, and violent attacks on individuals who had attempted to leave the community or expose its activities. The raid also uncovered evidence of the Blood Covenant's connections to other extremist organizations throughout the country, revealing a network of cooperation that had allowed similar groups to share resources, intelligence, and tactical knowledge. This discovery prompted a broader investigation that ultimately identified dozens of related organizations operating in rural communities across multiple states. The psychological impact on Blackwood Crossing's residents proved as devastating as the legal consequences for the Blood Covenant's leadership. Many individuals who had lived their entire lives within the organization's rigid social system struggled to adapt to the freedom and responsibility of making their own choices. Mental health professionals brought in to assist with the transition reported widespread symptoms of learned helplessness, depression, and anxiety among former residents. Children who had grown up under the Blood Covenant's educational system required extensive remedial instruction to overcome the distorted version of history and social relationships they had been taught. Many struggled with basic concepts like racial equality, democratic governance, and individual rights that conflicted with everything they had been taught to believe. Today, Blackwood Crossing exists as a ghost town, its buildings slowly deteriorating as nature reclaims the valley where the Blood Covenant once exercised absolute power. A few elderly residents remain, but they rarely speak to outsiders and seem to view the modern world with suspicion and fear. Most disturbing are the reports from researchers and journalists who have attempted to document the Blood Covenant's history. Many describe feeling watched while exploring the abandoned town, and several have reported encounters with individuals who claim to be descendants of the original Covenant families. These encounters typically involve warnings to leave the area and veiled threats about the consequences of publishing information about the organization's activities. Federal investigators believe that remnants of the Blood Covenant network remain active in other locations, having learned from Blackwood Crossing's exposure to operate more carefully while maintaining their core beliefs and objectives. Recent incidents involving racial violence and voter intimidation in several Appalachian communities show tactical similarities to Blood Covenant methods, suggesting that their influence may be more persistent and widespread than official records indicate. 5. Greystone Falls, Virginia, where science became sorcery and progress masked predation. Hidden in the mist-shrouded peaks of the Shenandoah Valley, Greystone Falls presented itself as a progressive mountain community that had successfully adapted to the modern world while preserving its natural beauty. The town boasted a state-of-the-art research facility, environmentally sustainable businesses, and residents who seemed remarkably well educated and prosperous for such a remote location. But this veneer of enlightened development concealed the operations of an organization that called itself the Collective, a group that had weaponized scientific knowledge and technological advancement to achieve levels of social control that made traditional secret societies seem primitive by comparison. The Collective's origins traced back to 1953, when a brilliant but ethically compromised physicist named Dr. Helena Voss purchased a sprawling estate in the valley following her dismissal from a classified government research program. Voss had been developing experimental techniques for psychological manipulation using combinations of electromagnetic frequencies, pharmaceutical compounds, and behavioral conditioning methods that push the boundaries of human experimentation far beyond acceptable limits. Rather than abandoning her research after losing government funding, Voss saw an opportunity to create the perfect laboratory environment where she could continue her work without oversight or ethical constraints. She began recruiting like-minded scientists, researchers, and technicians who shared her vision of using advanced knowledge to create a new form of human society based on scientific principles rather than traditional social structures. The collective's founding members represented disciplines ranging from psychology and pharmacology to computer science and bioengineering. What united them was a shared belief that most humans were incapable of making rational decisions about their own lives, and that a scientifically trained elite had both the right and responsibility to guide human development through carefully controlled interventions. Unlike other secret societies that relied on fear, superstition, or economic dependency, the collective built their power through the systematic application of cutting-edge scientific techniques designed to modify human behavior at the neurological level. They understood that true control required not just compliance, but genuine belief that their guidance was beneficial and necessary. The collective's initial experiments focused on the small population of existing residents in Greystone Falls, using them as unwitting test subjects for various behavioral modification techniques. They introduced trace amounts of experimental compounds into the local water supply, installed electromagnetic field generators disguised as cell phone towers, and employed sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques that gradually altered residents' decision-making processes. These early experiments proved remarkably successful. Within 5 years, the original residents had become completely dependent on the collective's guidance for major life decisions, while remaining convinced that they were living in an unusually harmonious and prosperous community. They willingly participated in regular health screenings that were actually comprehensive psychological evaluations, and they eagerly embraced new technologies and lifestyle changes recommended by the collective's experts. Building on this success, the collective began implementing a carefully planned expansion strategy designed to attract new residents who would be particularly susceptible to their methods. They established the Greystone Institute, a legitimate appearing research facility that published papers on environmental science, sustainable development, and community psychology, while serving as cover for their actual experiments. The Institute's public research focused on developing innovative solutions to rural economic challenges, attracting grants from government agencies and private foundations that provided both funding and credibility for the collective's operations. Their published work on community resilience and social cooperation earned recognition from academic institutions and policy organizations, further enhancing their reputation as enlightened problem solvers. Meanwhile, the collective's private research explored far more sinister applications of their scientific capabilities. They developed pharmaceutical compounds that could induce specific emotional states, alter memory formation, and modify personality traits with precision that surpassed anything achieved by conventional psychiatry. They created electromagnetic devices that could influence brain function from a distance, causing everything from mild discomfort to They created electromagnetic devices that could influence brain function from a distance, causing everything from mild discomfort to complete behavioral compliance, depending on the frequency and duration of exposure. Most disturbing was their work on what they termed cognitive architecture, the systematic restructuring of individual thought patterns to eliminate skepticism, independent thinking, and resistance to authority. Using combinations of chemical, technological, and psychological interventions, they could transform even highly intelligent and strong-willed individuals into compliant followers who genuinely believed that the collective's guidance represented their own freely chosen decisions. The collective's recruitment strategy targeted specific types of individuals who would both benefit their research and be unlikely to attract outside attention if they disappeared from their previous lives. They particularly sought out highly educated professionals experiencing career difficulties, individuals with valuable technical skills but limited social connections, and families seeking refuge from urban problems who would be grateful for the apparent sanctuary of Greystone Falls. New residents underwent what appeared to be a comprehensive orientation process designed to help them integrate into the community. In reality, this process included extensive psychological profiling, covert administration of experimental compounds, and the beginning of long-term behavioral modification protocols that would gradually transform them into loyal collective members. The collective's control methods were so sophisticated that most residents never realized they were being manipulated. The modifications occurred gradually over months or years, with each change seeming like a natural evolution of their own thoughts and preferences. Individuals who had once been skeptical of authority figures found themselves increasingly deferential to the collective's leadership. People who had valued their independence discovered that they felt more comfortable when following detailed guidance about their daily activities. Children born in Greystone Falls received even more intensive conditioning from birth, with their neurological development carefully monitored and guided through precisely timed interventions. The collective viewed these children as their greatest achievement, human beings whose cognitive architecture had been optimized from the beginning to function perfectly within their controlled society. The town's school system served as both an educational institution and a research laboratory where the collective tested new methods for cognitive development and social conditioning. Students received excellent instruction in conventional academic subjects while being subjected to experimental techniques designed to enhance their intelligence, creativity, and loyalty to the community's values. By the 1980s, Greystone Falls had achieved the collective's vision of a perfectly controlled society where every resident functioned as an integral component of a larger organism. Crime was virtually non-existent because the conditioning process eliminated antisocial impulses. Productivity was extraordinarily high because residents were neurologically optimized for their assigned roles. Social harmony was absolute because conflicting opinions and desires had been systematically eliminated. The collective also developed profitable applications for their research that provided funding while advancing their broader goals. They established consulting firms that offered behavioral modification services to corporations seeking to improve employee performance and compliance. They created pharmaceutical companies that produced medications with carefully designed side effects that made users more susceptible to suggestion and authority. Most lucratively, they began selling their services to other organizations seeking to establish similar controlled communities. The collective provided technical expertise, training programs, and then even key personnel to help establish satellite operations throughout the country. These partnerships created a network of scientifically controlled communities that shared resources, knowledge, and techniques while maintaining the appearance of independent development. The collective's operations began attracting federal attention in 1995 when a former employee of one of their consulting firms contacted the FDA with concerns about experimental drugs being tested on unwitting subjects. Dr. Marcus Webb had worked for 3 years as a biochemist in one of the collective's pharmaceutical operations before becoming suspicious about the true purpose of compounds he was developing. Webb's investigation revealed that medications ostensibly designed to treat depression and anxiety were actually sophisticated tools for behavioral control that could induce specific personality changes in patients who took them regularly. More disturbing, these medications were being distributed through legitimate medical channels to thousands of patients who had no idea they were participating in experimental programs. The FDA investigation that followed led to the discovery of similar operations in multiple states, all connected to research facilities that shared personnel and resources with the Greystone Institute. Federal investigators realized they were dealing with a coordinated network of human experimentation programs that had been operating without oversight for decades. The investigation was complicated by the collective's sophisticated counterintelligence capabilities and their extensive network of compromised individuals in government and academic institutions. Many officials who should have been investigating the organization instead found themselves strangely reluctant to pursue evidence or authorize aggressive enforcement actions. Federal agents also discovered that many of the collective's experimental subjects were so thoroughly conditioned that they actively resisted rescue attempts, genuinely believing that the organization's control over their lives was beneficial and necessary. Traditional law enforcement approaches proved ineffective against individuals who had been neurologically programmed to view outside authorities as threats to their community's well-being. The breakthrough in the investigation came when federal agents managed to intercept detailed technical documentation that the collective was transmitting between their various facilities. These documents revealed the true scope of their operations, including detailed records of thousands of human subjects and comprehensive descriptions of experimental procedures that violated every ethical standard for scientific research. The coordinated raids on collective facilities in 2001 uncovered what federal prosecutors described as the most sophisticated human experimentation program ever discovered on American soil. Investigators found laboratories containing advanced equipment for neurological manipulation, detailed psychological profiles on tens of thousands of individuals, and evidence of ongoing experiments that had been conducted without subjects' knowledge or consent for decades. The psychological rehabilitation of collective members proved extraordinarily challenging because their conditioning had altered their basic cognitive processes. Many individuals required months or years of intensive therapy to recover their ability to think independently and make autonomous decisions. Some never fully recovered, remaining dependent on external guidance for the rest of their lives. The investigation also revealed the existence of dozens of individuals who had been so thoroughly modified by collective experiments that they could no longer function in normal society. These people had been transformed into what investigators termed cognitive slaves, human beings whose personalities and decision-making capabilities had been so fundamentally altered that they existed primarily to serve the organization's purposes. Federal authorities faced the unprecedented challenge of determining legal responsibility for crimes committed by individuals whose capacity for independent moral reasoning had been scientifically eliminated. Many collective members had participated in clearly illegal activities while genuinely believing they were contributing to beneficial scientific research that would improve human society. The legal proceedings that followed took nearly a decade to complete, as prosecutors worked to understand and document crimes that pushed the boundaries of existing law. The collective's leadership was ultimately convicted on charges including conspiracy, human trafficking, illegal human experimentation, and violations of numerous federal regulations governing pharmaceutical research and medical practice. Most disturbing was the discovery that the collective's techniques had been refined and distributed to numerous other organizations throughout the country. Federal investigators identified evidence of similar operations in over 30 states, suggesting that scientifically based behavioral control had become a widespread tool for social manipulation that extended far beyond the original Greystone Falls community. Today, the former collective facilities remain under federal oversight, with ongoing monitoring to ensure that their experimental programs have been completely terminated. However, the sophisticated nature of their techniques means that some effects may persist indefinitely in individuals who were subjected to long-term conditioning. Mental health professionals continue to encounter patients whose symptoms suggest exposure to advanced behavioral modification techniques, indicating that collective-style operations may still be active in other locations. The organization's research has also been linked to various commercial applications in marketing, political campaigning, and corporate management that use scientifically validated methods for influencing human behavior on a mass scale. The legacy of Greystone Falls serves as a chilling reminder that the greatest threats to human freedom may come not from traditional forms of oppression, but from the systematic application of scientific knowledge to eliminate the cognitive foundations of independent thought and moral reasoning. These 5 communities represent just the documented cases where secret societies achieved total control over isolated populations. Federal investigators believe that dozens of similar operations remain active throughout rural America, having learned from these exposed examples to operate more carefully while pursuing the same fundamental goal of transforming free citizens into compliant subjects. What makes these stories particularly disturbing is how they reveal the vulnerability of small communities to systematic infiltration and control by well-organized groups with sufficient resources and patience. Each organization succeeded by exploiting the isolation, economic desperation, and social cohesion that characterize many rural areas, turning these potential strengths into vectors for manipulation and oppression. The psychological techniques developed by these groups have not disappeared with their exposure. Instead, many of their methods have been adopted and refined by commercial interests, political organizations, and other groups seeking to influence human behavior on a large scale. The line between legitimate persuasion and coercive manipulation continues to blur as our understanding of human psychology becomes more sophisticated and our technological capabilities expand. Perhaps most chilling is the realization that these 5 towns may represent only the beginning of a much larger phenomenon. As traditional social institutions continue to weaken and economic pressures increase in rural communities throughout America, the conditions that allowed these secret societies to flourish are becoming more widespread rather than less common. The residents who survived these controlled communities often describe a lingering sense that they are still being watched, still being influenced by forces they cannot see or understand. Some report receiving mysterious communications years after their supposed liberation, suggesting that the networks established by these organizations may be more persistent and far-reaching than official investigations have revealed. But these stories also demonstrate the power of individual courage in the face of systematic oppression. In each case, the secret society's control was ultimately broken by brave individuals who risked everything to expose the truth and seek help from outside authorities. Their willingness to speak out despite facing severe consequences serves as a reminder that even the most sophisticated forms of social control cannot completely eliminate the human capacity for moral resistance. As we've seen through these 5 towns, the threat of secret societies taking control of American communities is not a relic of the past, but an ongoing reality that requires constant vigilance. The methods may evolve, the technologies may advance, but the fundamental dynamic of organized groups exploiting vulnerable populations remains unchanged. The question is not whether such organizations still exist. Federal investigators know they do. The question is whether we as a society have learned enough from these exposed cases to recognize and resist similar operations before they achieve the level of control that made Covenant Hollow, Millfield Junction, Shadow Creek, Blackwood Crossing, and Greystone Falls into prisons disguised as communities. So what do you think? Have you ever driven through a small town that gave you an uneasy feeling, where the residents seemed just a little too coordinated in their responses, where the prosperity seemed too perfect for the location, or where asking simple questions generated reactions that seemed disproportionate to your curiosity? Drop a comment and let me know about any experiences that made you wonder what was really happening behind the friendly facade of small-town America. If you found yourself checking your surroundings while watching this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Our next investigation takes us even deeper into the hidden networks that continue to operate in rural communities across the country, and what we've discovered about their current activities will make these historical cases seem almost quaint by comparison. Until next time, remember that the most dangerous secrets aren't hidden in shadows, they're hiding in plain sight behind white picket fences and community potluck dinners. Stay curious, but more importantly, stay alert. The patterns we've uncovered today share disturbing similarities with reports federal investigators are receiving from communities across rural America right now. Small towns where new residents arrive with suspicious financial backing. Mountain settlements where traditional crafts suddenly become highly profitable export businesses. Research facilities that appear overnight in areas without the infrastructure to support them. religious communities that grow too quickly and become too isolated from their neighbors. What makes these contemporary situations particularly concerning is how the lessons learned from our 5 exposed towns have been applied to make new operations more sophisticated and harder to detect. Modern secret societies understand that total isolation raises red flags, so they maintain carefully managed connections to the outside world. They know that obvious wealth disparities attract attention, so they create more subtle forms of economic control. They've learned that complete information blackouts seem suspicious, so they allow controlled access to communications while monitoring everything. The technology available today makes surveillance and behavioral modification exponentially more powerful than what was available to the groups we've discussed. Smartphone tracking, social media monitoring, and data analytics provide unprecedented insights into human behavior and social relationships. Pharmaceutical advances allow for more precise chemical interventions. Psychological research has revealed new vulnerabilities in human decision-making that can be systematically exploited. Perhaps most troubling is how the internet has enabled these organizations to network and share techniques in ways that were impossible decades ago. The isolated experiments we've examined today can now be coordinated on a national scale, with successful methods being rapidly disseminated to groups operating in different regions. What once required years of trial and error can now be implemented using proven protocols developed by other organizations. Federal investigators report that recruitment methods have also evolved significantly. Rather than targeting desperate or vulnerable individuals exclusively, modern operations focus on attracting people who possess specific skills or social connections that advance their goals. They recruit through professional networks, online communities, and social movements that provide cover for their actual activities. They've become experts at identifying individuals who are dissatisfied with mainstream society but not yet committed to specific alternatives. The financial sophistication of these groups has also increased dramatically. They understand how to use legitimate business structures, charitable organizations, and investment vehicles to fund their operations while avoiding the scrutiny that obvious criminal enterprises attract. They've learned to diversify their revenue streams and create multiple layers of financial protection that make it difficult for investigators to trace money flows or identify the true scope of their operations. Most concerning is how these organizations have adapted to changes in law enforcement capabilities and legal frameworks. They study the cases we've discussed today, analyzing what led to exposure and developing countermeasures that make their operations more resistant to investigation. They train members in counter-surveillance techniques, create sophisticated communication security protocols, and establish legal defense strategies before they're needed. The psychological impact on communities targeted by these evolved operations is often more severe than what previous generations experienced. Modern behavioral modification techniques can create dependency and compliance while leaving subjects convinced they're making independent choices. Individuals subjected to these methods often resist rescue attempts more strongly than traditional cult members because they genuinely believe they're living freely and benefiting from their situation. Children growing up in these environments face particular risks because their psychological development occurs entirely within controlled parameters. Unlike previous generations, who might remember life before their communities were infiltrated, these children have no baseline for normal social relationships or decision-making processes. They're raised to view outside authorities as threats and their controlled environment as the only safe and moral way to live. The geographic distribution of suspected operations has also shifted significantly. While Appalachian regions remain attractive due to their isolation and limited law enforcement presence, modern groups have expanded into suburban areas, retirement communities, and even urban neighborhoods where they can blend in more effectively. They've learned to establish multiple small operations rather than creating single large communities that attract attention. Technology has enabled new forms of remote control that reduce the need for physical isolation. Groups can now influence members who live in different states through carefully managed communication networks, shared online platforms, and coordinated social media campaigns. This distributed approach makes it much harder for investigators to identify the full scope of an organization's membership or activities. The recruitment of government officials and law enforcement personnel has also become more systematic and sophisticated. Rather than relying on corruption or blackmail, these groups now focus on gradual ideological conversion of individuals already in positions of authority. They use professional development opportunities, social events, and shared interest groups to build relationships that eventually evolve into operational cooperation. Educational institutions have become particular targets because of their influence on community leaders and young people. Several universities in rural areas have reported unusual donor activities, visiting lecturer programs, and research partnerships that investigators believe may be connected to secret society operations. These academic connections provide both legitimacy and access to influential individuals who might not be reachable through other methods. The healthcare system represents another vector for infiltration and control. Medical professionals in rural areas often serve multiple communities and have access to detailed personal information about residents. Several recent cases have involved healthcare networks being used to distribute experimental medications, conduct unauthorized psychological evaluations, and gather intelligence about community dynamics and individual vulnerabilities. Religious institutions continue to be exploited, but modern approaches are more subtle than the overt manipulation we saw in places like Covenant Hollow. Contemporary operations focus on gradually shifting existing religious communities toward more authoritarian structures, rather than establishing obviously cult-like organizations. They work within established denominations, using theological arguments and social pressure to promote compliance with leadership directives. The role of social media in these operations cannot be overstated. Platforms that were designed to connect people and share information have become powerful tools for manipulation and control. Groups can now test messages, identify influential community members, and coordinate activities across vast distances with unprecedented precision. They've learned to use online echo chambers to reinforce their messaging and isolate members from contradictory information. Economic control methods have also evolved significantly. Rather than owning all local businesses directly, modern operations use complex financial networks to influence economic conditions in ways that increase community dependency on their services. They can manipulate employment opportunities, housing markets, and access to credit to create conditions that make their assistance seem necessary and beneficial. The legal challenges posed by these evolved operations are substantial. Many of their activities exist in gray areas where current laws provide limited recourse for victims or prosecutors. The sophistication of their psychological manipulation techniques raises questions about informed consent and criminal responsibility that existing legal frameworks aren't equipped to address. International connections have also become more common, with domestic operations receiving funding, training, and personnel from similar organizations in other countries. This global networking makes investigations more complex and provides these groups with resources and expertise that would be impossible to develop independently. The counterintelligence capabilities of modern secret societies often rival those of professional intelligence agencies. They use sophisticated surveillance techniques to monitor law enforcement activities, infiltrate investigation teams, and gather advance warning about potential raids or arrests. They've developed protocols for destroying evidence, relocating operations, and protecting key personnel that make successful prosecutions extremely difficult. Perhaps most disturbing is how these organizations have learned to exploit the political polarization and social divisions that characterize contemporary American society. They position themselves as protectors of traditional values, defenders of constitutional rights, or champions of social justice, depending on their target audience. This political camouflage makes it difficult for investigators to take action without appearing to target legitimate political movements. The recruitment of mental health professionals has become a particular priority because these individuals have both the training to implement behavioral modification techniques and the professional credibility to make their activities seem legitimate. Several recent cases have involved licensed therapists, counselors, and social workers using their positions to advance secret society objectives while claiming to provide standard therapeutic services. The infiltration of emergency services represents another serious concern. Police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and emergency dispatchers have access to sensitive information and the authority to respond to crisis situations in ways that can significantly impact community dynamics. Several investigations have revealed evidence of coordinated efforts to place sympathetic individuals in these critical positions. The use of charitable organizations and nonprofit structures has become increasingly sophisticated. These groups can now operate extensive social service programs, educational initiatives, and community development projects that provide genuine benefits while serving as cover for their actual objectives. The legitimate good work they perform makes it difficult for critics to raise concerns without appearing to attack beneficial community programs. Technology companies have become unwitting facilitators of these operations through the development of increasingly powerful tools for data collection, behavioral analysis, and social influence. While these technologies have legitimate applications, they also provide secret societies with capabilities that previous generations could never have imagined. The long-term implications of these evolved operations extend far beyond their immediate victims. As these groups continue to refine their techniques and expand their reach, they're creating a model for social control that could fundamentally alter the nature of American democracy. The combination of technological capability, psychological sophistication, and organizational learning represents a threat to individual freedom that may be unprecedented in human history. The challenge for law enforcement, policymakers, and ordinary citizens is developing effective responses to threats that are constantly evolving and adapting. Traditional approaches to investigating criminal organizations may be inadequate for dealing with groups that understand how to exploit legal protections, technological capabilities, and social divisions to advance their objectives. Education and awareness remain our best defenses against these sophisticated forms of manipulation. Understanding how these organizations operate, recognizing the warning signs of infiltration, and maintaining healthy skepticism about too good to be true opportunities can help communities resist the gradual process of control that characterizes modern secret society operations. The stories we've shared today serve as both historical warnings and contemporary alerts. While the specific organizations we've discussed have been exposed and dismantled, their methods live on in new forms that may be operating in communities across the country right now. The price of freedom, as they say, is eternal vigilance, and that vigilance has never been more necessary than it is today. Remember, the most effective forms of control are those that convince their victims they're not being controlled at all. Question prosperity that seems too convenient, community harmony that seems too perfect, and leadership that seems too concerned with your personal welfare. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't articulate exactly what that something is. And most importantly, maintain connections to the broader world beyond your immediate community. Isolation, whether physical, social, or informational, creates the conditions that allow these organizations to flourish. Stay engaged with diverse sources of information, maintain relationships outside your local area, and never let anyone convince you that their version of truth is the only version worth considering. The battle for the soul of American communities continues, and it's a battle that requires the participation of every citizen who values freedom, independence, and the right to make their own choices about how to live their lives. The organizations we've discussed today were ultimately defeated not by government agencies or law enforcement alone, but by ordinary people who had the courage to speak out and seek help when they recognized that something was fundamentally wrong with their situation. That same courage exists in communities across America today, waiting to be activated by individuals who refuse to accept that control and manipulation are acceptable prices to pay for prosperity, security, or social harmony. The choice, as always, is ours to make, but only if we remain aware that the choice exists and vigilant about protecting our right to make it freely. The survivors from these 5 towns share remarkably similar accounts of what they describe as the awakening, that moment when they first realized their communities weren't what they appeared to be. It's a psychological breaking point that often occurs years into their residency, triggered by seemingly minor inconsistencies that suddenly reveal the elaborate deceptions surrounding their daily lives. Former residents describe a gradual process of recognition that began with noticing small details that didn't quite align with the official narratives they'd been given. A business ledger left open on a desk showing transactions that made no sense. A conversation overheard between community leaders that revealed a knowledge they shouldn't have possessed. A child asking an innocent question that exposed the logical inconsistencies in the stories adults had been telling. What makes these awakening experiences particularly traumatic is how they force individuals to confront the reality that their entire understanding of their community and often their own lives has been systematically manipulated. People who thought they were living in paradise discover they've been prisoners. Individuals who believed they were part of something noble realize they've been exploited for someone else's gain. The psychological recovery process for survivors often takes years and requires specialized therapeutic approaches that most mental health professionals aren't trained to provide. Traditional therapy assumes that patients have a baseline understanding of normal social relationships and decision-making processes. But individuals who've lived under total social control often lack these fundamental reference points, making it difficult for them to recognize healthy boundaries or identify manipulative behavior. Support groups for survivors have emerged in various parts of the country, though they operate with extreme discretion due to ongoing safety concerns. Members report that sharing their experiences with others who've lived through similar situations provides validation and healing that's impossible to achieve through conventional therapy alone. These groups also serve as informal intelligence networks, sharing information about suspicious activities in rural communities and warning each other about potential threats. Federal investigators continue to monitor these survivor networks, not as suspects, but as valuable sources of information about how secret societies operate and evolve. The insights provided by individuals who've lived inside these organizations have proven invaluable for identifying new operations and understanding the psychological techniques used to maintain control. The economic impact of these exposed operations extends far beyond their immediate communities. Each revelation of systematic control and exploitation undermines public trust in rural institutions and development projects. Legitimate community organizations struggle to attract funding and support because potential donors and participants worry about hidden agendas and secret manipulations. This erosion of trust has created what researchers term institutional paranoia, a widespread suspicion of any organization or individual offering significant resources or assistance to isolated communities. While this skepticism provides some protection against future infiltration, it also prevents many genuine efforts to address the economic and social challenges facing rural America. The media coverage of these stories has followed predictable patterns that often obscure rather than illuminate the real lessons they contain. Sensationalistic reporting focuses on the most bizarre and dramatic aspects of these operations, while ignoring the systematic methods that allowed them to succeed for so long. This approach turns serious issues of social control and human rights violations into entertainment, reducing the chances that audiences will recognize similar patterns in their own communities. Academic researchers have faced significant challenges in studying these phenomena because of the sensitive nature of the subject matter and the ongoing legal proceedings surrounding many cases. Universities are reluctant to fund research that might expose them to liability or controversy, and many potential interview subjects remain too traumatized or fearful to participate in formal studies. The few scholarly investigations that have been completed reveal disturbing patterns in how these organizations selected their target communities. They consistently chose locations with specific demographic and geographic characteristics that made them vulnerable to infiltration and control. These factors included geographic isolation, economic distress, weak local government structures, limited law enforcement presence, and populations with high levels of social trust and community cohesion. Understanding these vulnerability factors has helped federal agencies develop early warning systems for identifying communities at risk of infiltration. However, these same factors are often associated with the qualities that make rural communities attractive places to live: strong social bonds, mutual support, and independence from external authorities. The challenge is protecting these positive characteristics while building resistance to manipulation and exploitation. Educational initiatives aimed at rural communities have shown some promise in raising awareness about these threats without creating paralyzing paranoia. These programs focus on teaching residents how to recognize the warning signs of systematic infiltration while maintaining the openness and trust that characterize healthy communities. The programs emphasize the importance of maintaining diverse information sources, questioning offers that seem too good to be true, and preserving connections to the broader world beyond immediate community boundaries. They also teach participants how to document suspicious activities and report concerns to appropriate authorities without compromising their safety. Law enforcement agencies have developed specialized training programs to help officers recognize and investigate secret society operations. These programs address the unique challenges posed by organizations that operate within legal gray areas and use sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques that leave few obvious traces of criminal activity. The training emphasizes the importance of building trust with community members who may be reluctant to report suspicious activities due to fear of retaliation or genuine belief that their situation is beneficial. Officers learn to recognize the subtle signs of social control and to approach potential victims with sensitivity and patience. International cooperation has become increasingly important as investigators have discovered connections between domestic secret societies and similar organizations operating in other countries. Thus, as international networks share resources, techniques, and personnel in ways that make individual operations more sophisticated and harder to detect or disrupt. The global nature of these networks has prompted the development of new legal frameworks for investigating and prosecuting crimes that cross international boundaries while involving complex psychological manipulation and social control techniques that existing laws weren't designed to address. Technology companies have begun developing tools specifically designed to help communities identify and resist systematic manipulation efforts. These technologies analyze communication patterns, financial flows, and social network structures to identify anomalies that might indicate coordinated influence operations. However, the same technologies that can protect communities from manipulation can also be used by secret societies to improve their own operations. This technological arms race between manipulators and defenders is likely to continue evolving as both sides develop more sophisticated capabilities. The legal precedents established through prosecuting these cases have created new frameworks for addressing crimes that involve systematic psychological manipulation and social control. Courts have grappled with questions about criminal responsibility when victims have been conditioned to participate willingly in illegal activities, and about the appropriate remedies for communities that have been systematically exploited. These legal developments have implications that extend far beyond secret society cases. They're influencing how courts handle issues involving corporate manipulation of consumers, political manipulation of voters, and institutional manipulation of vulnerable populations in healthcare, education, and social services. The ongoing legacy of these 5 towns serves as a reminder that the threats to individual freedom and community autonomy are constantly evolving. Each generation of secret societies learns from the mistakes of their predecessors, developing more sophisticated methods for achieving the same fundamental goal of transforming free citizens into controlled subjects. But the stories of survival and resistance from these communities also demonstrate the resilience of the human spirit and the power of individuals to reclaim their freedom even under the most oppressive circumstances. The courage shown by those who exposed these operations continues to inspire others facing similar situations and provides hope that no system of control, no matter how sophisticated, can completely eliminate the human capacity for moral resistance and the desire for genuine freedom. The most chilling aspect of these investigations isn't what they revealed about the past, but what they suggest about the present. Federal agents working these cases discovered that each exposed operation had been in contact with dozens of similar groups throughout the country. When authorities raided the facilities and seized communication equipment, they found evidence of a vast underground network that had been sharing techniques, resources, and intelligence for decades. These communications revealed that the 5 towns we've examined today weren't isolated experiments, but test sites for methods that were being refined and distributed to other locations. The psychological manipulation techniques developed in Greystone Falls were being implemented in suburban communities across the Midwest. The economic control strategies perfected in Millfield Junction had been adapted for use in retirement communities in Arizona and Florida. The information warfare methods pioneered by the Archive were being deployed in college towns throughout New England. What makes this network particularly dangerous is how it has evolved to exploit modern vulnerabilities that didn't exist when these original operations were established. Social media platforms provide unprecedented access to personal information and social relationships. Dating apps and professional networking sites allow infiltrators to identify and target specific individuals with surgical precision. Online forums and comment sections can be used to test messaging and identify potential recruits without any face-to-face contact. The recruitment process has become so sophisticated that many targets never realize they're being evaluated and gradually drawn into controlled environments. A promising job offer that requires relocation to a remote area. A romantic relationship that develops online and eventually leads to moving to a new community. An investment opportunity that seems too good to pass up but requires personal involvement in a specific location. Mental health professionals who have worked with recent survivors describe psychological conditioning techniques that surpass anything documented in the historical cases. These modern operations understand how to exploit the neurological mechanisms underlying addiction using intermittent reinforcement schedules and biochemical manipulation to create dependency relationships that feel like genuine affection and loyalty. Children raised in these contemporary operations receive conditioning that begins before birth, with pregnant mothers subjected to carefully controlled environments designed to influence fetal development. These children grow up with altered brain chemistry and neurological patterns that make them naturally compliant and resistant to outside influence. By adolescence, many have been so thoroughly programmed that they actively recruit new members and defend the organization against any perceived threats. The financial sophistication of modern operations makes the money laundering schemes we discussed earlier look primitive by comparison. These groups now operate legitimate multinational corporations, charitable foundations, and investment funds that generate billions of dollars in revenue while serving as covers for their actual activities. They've learned to use complex financial instruments, offshore banking systems, and cryptocurrency technologies to move money and resources across international boundaries without detection. Perhaps most disturbing is how these organizations have infiltrated legitimate institutions throughout American society. Recent investigations have revealed secret society members working as teachers in public schools, therapists in mental health clinics, social workers in child protective services, and administrators in government agencies. These individuals use their positions to identify vulnerable families and individuals who can be recruited or manipulated without attracting attention. The healthcare system has become a particular target because medical professionals have access to detailed personal information and the authority to prescribe medications that can alter mood, cognition, and behavior. Several ongoing investigations involve networks of doctors, nurses, and pharmacists who have been systematically using their positions to advance secret society objectives while appearing to provide legitimate medical care. Religious institutions continue to be exploited, but the methods have become far more subtle than the overt manipulation we saw in Covenant Hollow. Modern operations focus on gradually shifting existing congregations toward more authoritarian structures by introducing new theological concepts, changing leadership structures, and isolating members from outside religious influences. Many congregants never realize their faith community has been infiltrated until the transformation is complete. Educational institutions at all levels have become targets for infiltration and influence operations. Elementary schools provide access to children during their most formative years. High schools allow recruiters to identify teenagers who are struggling with identity issues or family problems. Colleges and universities offer opportunities to influence future leaders while they're developing their worldviews and career ambitions. The recruitment of law enforcement personnel has become a particular priority because these individuals have access to sensitive information, the authority to use force, and the public trust necessary to deflect suspicion from their activities. Several recent cases have involved police officers, sheriff's deputies, and federal agents who used their positions to protect secret society operations while appearing to investigate them. Technology has enabled new forms of remote control that reduce the need for physical communities like the ones we've discussed today. Modern operations can maintain psychological influence over members who live in different states or even different countries through carefully managed online interactions, shared virtual experiences, and coordinated social media campaigns that create the illusion of organic community development. Artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies are being adapted for use in psychological manipulation and behavioral control. These systems can analyze vast amounts of personal data to identify individual vulnerabilities and customize influence techniques for maximum effectiveness. They can also monitor communications and social interactions to detect signs of wavering loyalty or potential defection before they become serious threats. The legal challenges posed by these evolved operations are forcing fundamental changes in how we understand concepts like consent, coercion, and criminal responsibility. When individuals have been subjected to sophisticated neurological conditioning from birth, traditional legal frameworks struggle to determine whether their actions represent genuine choices or programmed responses. International cooperation has become essential because modern secret societies operate across national boundaries with the same ease that legitimate multinational corporations do. Intelligence agencies are developing new protocols for sharing information and coordinating investigations while respecting sovereignty and civil liberties protections that vary significantly between countries. The survivors from these contemporary operations face challenges that their predecessors from the historical cases couldn't have imagined. Their conditioning often involves neurological modifications that may be permanent, making psychological recovery extremely difficult or impossible. Many require ongoing medical supervision and pharmaceutical interventions just to function in normal society. Support networks for these modern survivors operated with unprecedented security measures because the organizations they've escaped possess surveillance and retaliation capabilities that rival those of professional intelligence agencies. Safe houses use military-grade security systems. Communication is conducted through encrypted channels that change frequently, and participants often undergo physical appearance modifications to avoid recognition. The economic impact of these operations now extends throughout the global financial system. Money laundering schemes involve legitimate banks, investment firms, and commercial enterprises that unknowingly process illegal funds through routine business transactions. The collapse of a single major operation can trigger investigations that expose corruption and manipulation throughout entire industry sectors. What makes these contemporary threats particularly insidious is how they exploit the very technologies and institutions that we depend on for protection and information. The internet services we use to stay connected with family and friends can be monitored and manipulated to influence our thoughts and behaviors. The medical treatments we rely on for health and well-being can be modified to alter our neurological function in ways we'll never detect. The democratic institutions we trust to protect our rights and freedoms can be infiltrated and subverted by individuals who appear to be legitimate public servants but are actually working to advance secret society objectives. The news sources we depend on for accurate information can be influenced or controlled by organizations with their own hidden agendas. But perhaps the most troubling aspect of this evolution is how it has made traditional warning signs unreliable. The isolation and obvious control that characterized places like Covenant Hollow and Blackwood Crossing would immediately raise red flags today. Modern operations maintain carefully crafted facades of openness, diversity, and community engagement that make them appear to be exactly the opposite of what they actually are. The question that keeps federal investigators awake at night is not whether more sophisticated operations are currently active. They know they are. The question is whether our society has developed the awareness, tools, and institutions necessary to identify and resist these threats before they achieve the level of control that characterized the 5 towns we've examined today. The answer to that question may determine whether future generations will enjoy the freedoms and opportunities that we take for granted, or whether they'll find themselves living in a world where the line between voluntary community participation and systematic social control has become so blurred that the difference no longer matters. These aren't distant threats or abstract possibilities. They're happening right now in communities across America, using methods that are more sophisticated and harder to detect than anything we've discussed today. The only question is whether we'll recognize them in time to do something about it, or whether we'll wake up one day to discover that the choices we thought we were making freely were actually being made for us